All, and my name is Pekka Pitkänen. I'm a senior lecturer in humanities at the University of Gloucestershire, and I shall be talking today about Easter and its origins. And let's wait for a little bit before we actually get started if somebody is joining a little bit late. Okay, then let's get started. So to say it again, my name is Pekka Pitkänen, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Gloucestershire, and I will be talking about the origins of Easter today. And basically, when you have any questions, please post them on the live stream, and I shall try and respond to them. Possibly not during the time that I actually be doing the main talk, but after that. But let's see how it goes. And I hope you'll enjoy the issues that are going to be covered here today. And what I'm planning to do is I'll have a look at, first of all, a bit at Easter in popular culture, and then tie it with issues that relates to the issue of post-Christendom and Christendom, which preceded post-Christendom. Then I'll talk a bit about Easter and its origins, and from there I shall be talking about Passover as the festival from which Easter emerged, and about the origins of Passover, and that's really then about the origins of Easter as well. And then I'll chat a little bit about Easter today. So that's what I'm planning to do. And in terms of the title, we were talking about Easter eggs and hot cross buns, and the reason why that is so suitable for this one is that they are very popular symbols about Easter in Britain, and wider than that as well. Easter eggs particularly wider than in Britain, but we know about hot cross buns. And I've got a couple of specimens here. Here is one Easter egg, and hopefully that's showing. And it's supposed to be a deluxe version from the shop that I bought it. And here's another one in mint, just in case. The one that was salted caramel wasn't enough. And a couple of packs of hot cross buns. Some people might not be familiar with these if you're watching from outside Britain. And these are also, according to the shop that I bought them from, a deluxe version of hot cross buns. And I have here another one which is made of chocolate, or actually mixed in with chocolate. So these are the sort of culprits of the season, as it were. And it's actually nothing unusual to have some special foods for particular festivals, particularly religious festivals. And again, eggs and hot cross buns are notable ones for Easter. And basically what I would like to draw attention to is that these foods carry out with them symbolism, as you would call it, where an object has a meaning associated with it, and the symbol or the symbolism within that object refers to the issue, and then those who people know about that symbolism, then they associate that symbolism with the object. So we associate Easter with the hot cross buns and then the Easter eggs. And I shall be talking about the specific symbolism that relates to Easter eggs and hot cross buns in a moment. But one of the interesting things about symbols is that they are basically a social construct. When people's thinking about symbols changes, for example, when they might know a little bit less about what symbols mean and what they might have meant in the past, the meaning of the symbols changes. And this is the case with Christian symbols. When people know about their meaning or meanings less, those meanings shift. And in this sense, for one thing, the eggs and hot cross buns may become more like basic items that might be offered not only during Easter but at other times as well. And they might be treats that people just simply enjoy in general and don't quite know how and why those objects became part of something that they now might have simply as part of life without really kind of thinking about what's happening with them or what the background is. But in terms of symbols, the process can happen in both ways. New symbols can be created and meanings can be associated to symbols anew, which kind of, in a sense, make them more specific in terms of what they refer to. And that's actually what happened to Easter as a festival as a whole. It was something that was created based on earlier practices that did not have the meanings that Easter now has or subsequently had. Associated, but new meanings were brought in. And we can think of a kind of evolutionary trajectory of the festival, of birth and development, and now it's fading away, as most people would know in the European context. So let's have a look at this development and trace it. And in this process, we'll go back in time some 3,000 years, 3,000 or 3,500 years or so. And largely, I shall be going progressively back in time, even though not completely so. And the reason why we have actually Easter holidays at all, and talking about the holidays as public holidays, that traces back to some 1,500 years to the 4th century in the Common Era, or Anno Domini, as we might use as well, counting from the birth of Jesus Christ, whom we will talk about in a moment. And at that time, the Roman Emperor Constantine, in his Edict of Milan in 313, and after him the Emperor Theodosius, later in the same century, in the Edict of Thessalonica in 380, made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Well, Constantine made it a permitted religion, and then Theodosius the only permitted religion. And other religions were then in the late 4th century proscribed, and even other versions of Christianity, such as what you call Arian Christianity, were not looked upon favorably and could and were suppressed. And the setup where Christianity was placed together with the state, and or might still be placed together with the state, is called Christendom. And in terms of the history of Christianity as a religion, it can be considered a seismic shift in contrast to the first 3 centuries of Christianity, where Christianity, when it emerged originally, it was a very small minority, and it was within the Roman Empire where it arose, and it could be persecuted so as to root it out. And so a real big shift there in the 4th century that took place. And the legacy of Christendom then carried over across Europe, also reaching Britain after the Christianization of Britain from the latter part of the first millennium CE on. And for instance, in Scandinavia, this happened in the early from the early second millennium on in Northern Europe, which sort of was a move from south to the north, as one might think in terms of the historical process. And the Western Christendom then was in place during the Middle Ages. In terms of England, the establishment of Church of England took place as part of the Protestant Reformations of the 16th century that largely took place in Northern Europe. And when the Church of England was founded, it was in continuation to the Catholic Church and could be continuously characterized as a state church. And of course, we have now Anglican Church still with us, so to say, to say the least, today. But with the rise of modernity, and perhaps it's fair to say that that took place from about the 17th century on, even though where do you draw the line is something that one can ask questions about. Roughly speaking, modern scientific worldviews would replace pre-modern Christendom-based worldviews. And this would then reduce the authority and influence of the Christian church in society, with the church's role starting to gradually wane one way or another. And that process has been taking place for centuries now, and it's ongoing. For instance, the Anglican Church still has links with the state, clearly, a variety of them, but things are fading away little by little. Now, in terms of the origins of Easter, coming back to that then, we were talking about the time when Christianity was made state religion, and 300 years before that, and I already alluded to the well-known fact actually that around in the first century CE or AD, which basically again is influence of Christianity, Christianity formed as a Jewish sect. And as a religion that separated from Judaism, the religion of Judaism. And the origins of Christianity are described in the so-called New Testament, a collection of earliest Christian texts. And these are easily available as part of Bibles today, as part of our Christian culture, or post-Christian culture, one could say so, or post-Christendom. The earlier part of the Bible can be divided into two parts. The latter part is New Testament, and the earlier part, the so-called Old Testament, or as the Jews might call it, the Hebrew Bible, or they use also the word Tanakh, which refers to Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which is the law, prophets, and writings, is the set of texts predating Christianity that Jews used at the time of the birth of Christianity and still use today. But Jews obviously don't use the New Testament. And here I just flash out a copy of a Bible. It says Holy Bible in terms of how religious people attribute that holiness to those scriptures. And on typical font, it's about this size, containing the Old and New Testaments. Jesus can be seen as the founder of Christianity, even though there's a little bit more nuancing to that. But for our purposes, we can say that Jesus was the founder of Christianity, and he was basically a tradesman, a carpenter, and roughly you can think of modern carpenters as well. And he lived in northern Palestine, Israel, in Galilee, and he wanted to reform the Judaism of his day, which was by then, roughly speaking, about 1,000 years old already as a religion. And the Jewish religious establishment did not like that, but arranged for his execution. And we can see some of that described in the documents of the New Testament. And this was done by the Romans who ruled the area at the time. The area was part of the Roman Empire. And the method of execution was crucifixion. And a little bit more about that I may mention in a moment. And Jesus' followers, who then became the first Christians, believed then that God had resurrected Jesus a couple of days after his death. And they also explained these events based on the Jewish scriptures, which is the Old Testament / Hebrew Bible. And cross, the Roman instrument, which was pretty much of a brutal method of execution, became a symbol of Christianity. Basically, you hang on the cross and you get tired and you die by asphyxiation or lack of oxygen in a pretty tortuous way. And then Christians established a new community of people based on their belief in Jesus, both a man and also a divine being, a son of God at that. And the community basically subsequently, a very tiny community in the beginning. Basically, Jesus, according to the New Testament, had 12 disciples. And from this tiny community, a larger movement grew. And in the next 300 years, it became strong enough that the Roman imperial authorities thought they would be useful to co-opt it with the state. And that's what they did. And that's how world history then was shaped from there. But we are going back or staying in the first century and going back in time at the moment. And it's now we can note that Jesus' execution took place during the Jewish festival of Passover. And this Jewish festival of Passover then became Easter in Christianity. And as one might expect, the form of that festival was also transformed from the Jewish one. And calendarically, the Christian Easter is basically counted on solar calendar, even though there are some lunar features to counting the festival. And those dates were set since the 4th century, and there is some more complication to that, but I won't talk about that here. Now, Jewish Passover itself is counted based on lunar calendar, and there are issues of intercalation, that is occasionally adding a 13th month in lunar calendar, because lunar calendar comes to a little bit less than a solar year in terms of the number of days in a year. And accordingly, Jewish and Christian Easter do not generally coincide, even when they take place broadly at the same time in practice. And this year, the Jewish Passover started last Saturday, 27th of March. And now let's get on to the symbolism of Easter eggs and hot cross buns a little bit, now that we have talked about a little bit about the origins of the Jewish festival of, or rather the Christian festival of Passover from, or festival of Easter from Passover. And again, I flashed the one of the Easter eggs. This is the salted caramel version. They come in various shapes and sizes. And decorating eggs goes back at least 5,000 years, if not more, and it seems that clearly more. And eggs are used as part of Jewish Passover tradition, and they apparently are symbolizing the cycle of life and new beginnings. And this seems to be where Christianity took the symbolism from, and this seems to have happened from early times of Christianity on. And in Christianity, the symbolism is resurrection of life, and that fits with the idea of new life, surely. And chocolate, that's the important one of the important things with these ones. That came into use from about 1700 on, apparently in France, as it appears to be the case. And then hot cross buns, they're more of an English and British thing. And they may have originated sometime in the 14th century, and in line with that, apparently in England, even though the origins are not entirely clear. And the cross there is the Christian symbol of suffering and resurrection of Christ. And now we have been in the 1st century and talked about how Easter started from the Jewish festival of Passover. Let's go back in time some more. Jewish Passover itself was already about 1,000 years old at the time of Jesus, at least. Well, there is some discussion about exactly how it formed, but let's say 1,000 years and not get into any of the complexities. At the time of the origins of the festival, Jews were in the form of ancient Israel from which Judaism itself descended and developed. for ancient Israelites and then Jews, Passover commemorated their liberation from bondage in Egypt in the latter part of the 2nd millennium BCE. Basically, the Israelites were slaves there, and they, according to the biblical story, they were liberated from there. And the festival is described, and the events of the Exodus, as it is called, the Exodus from Egypt, is described in the Hebrew Bible, and particularly the book of Exodus, which basically reflects the name of the event. And the festival, again, it takes place in the spring. And the interesting thing is that in the Hebrew Bible, it is in the middle of what is counted as the first month of the year. And here I just mentioned that there are actually 2 New Years in effect in the ancient Near East, one in the spring and one in the autumn. And the fact that there are those 2 New Years, and there could be a New Year in the autumn, links with the idea that the Jewish New Year today, or in today's time, takes place in the autumn, if you observe that in the state of Israel, for example. But the spring was the main New Year in the ancient Near East. We can say that. And this first month in the spring, or generally the time of the spring, which then also links with the spring equinox, is a time when barley comes out in the Near East as the first type of grain to ripen in the spring. That is, again, in the geographical area in question. And it's easy to make unleavened bread from barley. And in the biblical materials, it's prescribed how the Israelites are supposed to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. And that's the duration of the spring festival. And then the other famous component of the Jewish Passover festival was originally the sacrificing of a lamb on the eve when the festival of Passover starts. And that starts in the evening, and that was the time when day started in the ancient world, in the evening rather than in the morning, at sunset, or right when it starts to get dark. And this sacrifice then at the start of the festival was combined with the eating of the unleavened bread to form the overall festival. And why then these animal sacrifices? It was usual in the ancient Near East to sacrifice animals to gods in the ancient world, and that was part of the life of the ancient people, that to appease and also to provide food, at least metaphorically speaking, and sometimes they felt it more than as a metaphor, to the gods. They would sacrifice animals. In Judaism, animal sacrifices ceased in the latter part of the 1st century AD, when the main Jewish place of worship, the so-called Second Temple, was destroyed by the Romans. And we may note also here how Jesus was and is seen as a sacrificial lamb in Christian thinking. And there is actually a transformation from the concept of animal sacrifices into a death on the cross by asphyxiation and exhaustion. And that was some of the creative thinking and reconstitution of rituals and thinking in early Christianity, where the Passover was converted into Easter, let's say that way. And actually, it is not clear at what time of the year the Exodus took place, if it took place at all, if some claim. And there is a lively scholarly discussion about this. It's portrayed to have taken place in the spring in the Hebrew Bible. And again, this is about combining it with the start of the grain season. So, in other words, a spring festival was linked with liberation from Egyptian bondage by Judaism, or ancient Israel, its predecessor, from which Judaism more or less, in a sense, naturally followed on. And then this linking of liberation with spring, together with the sacrifices, accompanying sacrifices, with all this done, a Passover festival was created some 3,000 years ago, give or take. And in terms of spring festivals, we know of spring festivals in the ancient Near East from before the time of the birth of ancient Israel. And one famous example of them is the so-called Andarsum, perhaps a crocus festival in ancient Anatolia. And on the whole, as with ancient Israel, the start of the year in the area was typically associated with the spring equinox and the ripening of the barley harvest. So I'll just, perhaps that's repeating some things that I've said in some ways. So all in all, we can see how the Christian Easter has its origins in the arrival and celebration of spring in the ancient world through transformations that have added meaning to the festival and at least arguably even masked its initial origins. So let's now then return to the present for the final bit of the comments that I'll directly make here. In the life cycle of the Easter festival, we are now in a post-Christendom era in Britain and Europe where things pertaining to the festival are fading away in popular or, let's say, national culture. And in the sense of thinking of its origins as a spring festival, then going on to Passover, Easter from the international holiday, and now it's fading away. And in my opinion, that's fine. That's my personal opinion. And at the demise of Christendom, and considering that there's a lot of criticism that has been made of Christendom in other respects as only scientific issues, but I won't get into those now. It is not necessarily not necessarily needed to lament that much the demise of Christendom, is my personal opinion. And we can reflect back at the origins and past history of the festival. And I think we can just enjoy it as a spring festival, Easter, as it more or less originally was. While the climate in the near or today's Middle East, really the same area, roughly speaking, is somewhat different from Europe, on the whole, things translate fine enough in that sense. We must make a little side note here, though. Things are a bit different in the southern hemisphere for those who celebrate these festivals there. I cannot get into those issues here in any detail, but make a couple of quick points that one can reflect on. In the ancient Near East, there were the first one is in the ancient Near East there were major festivals also in the autumn, and then the second point is, and maybe on the other hand, in an era where issues that relate to decolonization are being considered, one can observe that northern concepts have been brought to bear on the south, particularly due to the dominance of Europe in the last 500 years in world history. Anyways, all this said, coming back to Britain in particular, it is nice to have and keep a festival, in my opinion at least, as a celebration of the arrival of spring and as providing a break from things that are being done in daily life. And those with religious links can also suitably add a religious, or in addition can add a religious meaning to the festival if they would like to do so. And I would say that we all can enjoy some hot cross buns and chocolatey Easter eggs, well, assuming that our dietary restrictions permit that. Thank you very much on that part. And if you would like to make any comments or have any questions, then please do feel free to do so. Okay, the question is, why do you think Easter has stayed popular even for people who are not religious, compared to something like Lent, which is perhaps only acknowledged by Christians? I think, yeah, I obviously I wouldn't be able to talk for everybody, but my guess is that simply because it provides a nice break in the spring, which really ties with its really original origins. That I would say. I can't think of anything anything more in those terms just right at the moment. And there's a question from Leslie, and that was Haley a moment ago. And from Leslie, do you think it's fair to say that traditions like giving Easter eggs are keeping Christian festivals alive for the generations of young people who are less engaged with the church? I do think so. I think even if people don't recognize it, they might in other contexts come across with the concept, or when we hear about Easter eggs, that might somehow stimulate interest in why Easter eggs are being given. So yes, I would think that it's a bit of a kind of thing. Culture consists of a variety of things that are happening, and then this is one component of culture that sort of, if and as it continues, keeps culture up, as it were. Is anything known about this? Hillary's asking, is anything known about the spicing of HCB? Not from the top of my head, I'm not sure, but let's see if I can use a cheat sheet here. No, I'm sure it is known, but I do not know those details. I beg your pardon. Now I can try and see what if I can find it. The spices are supposed to be signifying the spices used to embalm Jesus at his burial. That is the explanation that I have cheated about on Wikipedia. I must confess that I can use that as well from the internet. Yes, you are saying if the spicing is in memory of the embalmed body of Jesus. Yep, that's what it said. That is on the embalming, Hillary. Yep. And I can only be a spokesman for Wikipedia here. It does include good information at times. Obviously, one should not rely on it. Any of the students who are watching, you should use it only for basic information, really, the Wikipedia, and then go with academic sources otherwise. But it can come in handy on a variety of occasions. Yes, and in all honesty, I am not necessarily 100% savvy about exactly when you should eat your egg and exactly when you should spice your bun in traditional thinking, to be perfectly honest. At the moment, I think they're not that. Oh, sorry. There's Emma Smith who has commented. Sorry. I hope I'm seeing all of them. Is mentioning that there has been a lot of talk lately around school holidays tying in with Christian holiday like Easter, and that practice being outdated. What are your thoughts on that? My thoughts are generally that, like with all these cultural aspects and national holidays, they are basically decided by people, and it's the consensus and decision of people, whoever has power, whether it's people power or power of the parliament or a combination of both. Let's say in a democratic in a country that clearly identifies itself as democratic, it's a decision of the people how things should be done, and we know that the power of the church as such has waned. And obviously, the church, I would expect, would think that Easter should be kept as a holiday, Other people might disagree. If other people disagree, then it might have to go. But I have argued here, as it were, to use that, or spoken for the idea that now that we have those holidays, why give them up? Why not enjoy spring holidays? That's my opinion on it. And Hillary has commented that this year's craze is the Easter tree, an interesting synthesis of Christmas and Easter. Okay, I didn't notice that, so that's interesting. Lovely. Feel free to make any comments or etc. and perhaps questions if you would like to still further. We've got a little bit more time according to the schedule. Of course, we can wind things down a little bit earlier if people can't force anything out from themselves, as it were, if so as to use this expression. But great to chat if you have any thoughts you'd like to express still. Yes, and coming back to Hillary's sort of maize, saffron, allspice peel, I don't seem to have that information at hand in terms of those specific details about the buns. But I'm guessing that that will be a fairly small number of people who probably will be kind of in the know of all those specific details. So that's where the issue is about with these symbols and objects. What should they be, and what details people agree on, and what variation there might be. Hillary is asking, there have been various clerical moves to standardize the date of Easter. What are my thoughts? I mean, my personal opinion on that would be, again, it depends on what people would like to do. And the issue of standardizing the date is something that one can ask. Do we need to all have Easter at the same time? And we can ask this in the context of, and thinking of Southern Hemisphere, if we think of Easter being associated with spring, one very radical proposition might be to have Easter in the spring of the Southern Hemisphere, which is the autumn of the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know if something like that has ever been suggested, but one could consider that, let's say, in my personal opinion. Then, of course, in a rainforest, which is in equatorial rainforest, when would you have that? I'm not quite that savvy about the seasons there, so one would have to ask those questions. Depending, of course, again, on to what extent one might want to then tie it with seasons and continue tying it with the seasons, if that makes sense, Hillary. But I'm thinking that in terms of radical post-Christendom, in a radical post-Christendom stream of thinking, let's say. Okay, I think we may have sort of covered it now. So I would like to simply say thanks to everyone who has been part of this one, and would like to wish you all a very happy Easter and a very happy break in spring that the Easter break is about. So, and of course, those who are who might be even if there's anybody who is following from the southern hemisphere, a very happy break in the autumn time. So, thank you very much, and goodbye on my part.